In the heart of a city known for its glitz and high-end parties, an event was about to take place that would bring together some of the wealthiest and most influential people in town. The host? A man who had more money than he knew what to do with, a business tycoon who owned everything from skyscrapers to private islands. His mansion sat on a hill overlooking the ocean, its lights glowing like a beacon against the night sky. It was the kind of place where dreams were made, and sometimes broken. Among the crowd buzzing around the grand entrance were familiar faces, celebrities flashing smiles for cameras, politicians shaking hands, and CEOs whispering deals over glasses of expensive champagne. Everyone there seemed to have one thing in common. They all belonged. They were part of a world where money talked louder than words, and power was measured by how many zeros were in your bank account. But not everyone at the party fit into this picture-perfect scene. Behind the scenes, a group of waitstaff moved, quietly, carrying trays of food and drinks, blending into the background as if they weren't even there. One of them was a young woman who didn't share the same privileges as the guests she served. She wasn't born into wealth or fame. Instead, she worked hard every day just to make ends meet. Her life was far removed from the luxury surrounding her. But tonight, fate had placed her in the middle of it all. As she navigated through the crowded halls, balancing plates of gourmet appetizers, she couldn't help but notice how different these people were from her. Their clothes screamed designer labels, their watches cost more than her yearly rent, and their laughter carried a carefree tone she rarely experienced herself. Yet, despite feeling out of place, she kept her head down and focused on doing her job. After all, this wasn't her world. It was theirs. What she didn't realize yet was that this evening would be unlike any other. While the rich and powerful mingled under crystal chandeliers, something unexpected was brewing beneath the surface. Conversations happening in hushed tones hinted at secrets that could shake the foundations of the lives these people had built. And though no one paid attention to the quiet waitress weaving between tables, she was about to become the unlikely center of a story no one saw coming. For now, however, she remained invisible, just another face in the crowd of staff, ensuring the party ran smoothly. But deep inside, she felt a strange pull, a gut feeling telling her that this night might change everything. Little did she know, her instincts were right. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. For her, or for the glittering world she'd stepped into, even if only for a few hours. As the evening wore on, the party grew louder and more chaotic. The clinking of glasses, bursts of laughter, and the hum of conversations filled the air. The waitstaff moved like shadows, weaving through the crowd, refilling drinks and clearing empty plates. Amidst all this, the young woman found herself paying closer attention to the guests than she normally would. Maybe it was the overwhelming contrast between their world and hers. Or maybe it was just curiosity getting the better of her. Whatever it was, she couldn't help but overhear bits and pieces of what they were saying. At first, it seemed like typical rich people talk, boasting about vacations in far-off places, discussing exclusive clubs, or complaining about trivial things like delayed private jets. But as she lingered near certain groups, pretending to adjust a napkin or straighten a tray, she started picking up on something else. There were pauses in the conversations, subtle shifts in tone, and glances, exchanged that felt off. It was as if some topics weren't meant for everyone's ears. One particular conversation caught her attention when she was serving champagne at a corner table. Two men, both dressed sharply in tailored suits, leaned in close to each other, their voices low but urgent. She only caught fragments. Land deal, offshore accounts, and make sure no one finds out. Her instincts prickled. These weren't just idle words. They carried weight, secrets lurking beneath the surface. She quickly glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed, but no one seemed to care. To the rest of the staff and guests, these men were just another pair of wealthy individuals enjoying the night. Later, While clearing dishes from another table, she overheard a woman whispering to her companion about the community being relocated. The phrase sounded harmless enough, but the way the woman said it, almost guiltily, made her pause. Relocated. What did that even mean? Was someone being forced out of their home? She thought back to her own neighborhood, where families struggled to keep roofs over their heads, and wondered if there was a connection. The more she listened, the more uneasy she felt. These weren't just random comments. They formed a pattern, hints of something bigger and darker. Something that didn't sit right with her. Growing up, she'd heard stories about powerful people taking advantage of those who couldn't fight back. Her own family had faced hardships because of decisions made by people sitting comfortably in boardrooms, far removed from the consequences of their actions. And now, here she was, standing in the middle of it all, witnessing firsthand how the system worked, or rather, how it failed so many. By the time she retreated to the kitchen for a brief break, her mind was racing. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that this wasn't her business. She was just a waitress, here to do a job and go home. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Those hushed conversations, the careful looks, the coded language, it all pointed to something bigger than she could ignore. Deep down, she knew that staying silent might mean becoming part of the problem. And yet, speaking up came with risks she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Still, as she stepped back into the glittering chaos of the party, she couldn't stop herself from looking closer, listening harder. Somewhere in this sea of wealth and privilege, there was a story waiting to be uncovered. Whether she wanted to be part of it or not, the pieces were falling into place, and she was beginning to realize that she might hold one of the most important ones. The night was wearing on, and the mansion was alive with energy. Laughter echoed through the halls, and the clink of glasses seemed never-ending. The young woman had been moving non-stop for hours, her feet aching but her mind still sharp. She wasn't just focused on serving food and drinks anymore. She was paying attention to everything around her. Every word, every glance, every pause in conversation felt like a clue waiting to be pieced together. At one point, while carrying an empty tray back toward the kitchen, she noticed a door, slightly ajar. It led to what looked like a private study, dimly lit and quieter than the rest of the house. Curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped inside, telling herself she'd only stay for a moment to catch her breath. But as she closed the door behind her, something caught her eye. A laptop left open on the desk. The screen displayed an email thread, and though she knew it wasn't her place to look, she couldn't help herself. Her eyes scanned the text quickly, and her stomach dropped. It was all there, details about shady deals, names of people involved, and plans that sounded downright illegal. One line stood out. "Make sure the paperwork is clean this time." Clean? What did that even mean? Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was reading. This wasn't just gossip or speculation. It was evidence, plain and simple. Before she could think any further, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic surged through her. If she got caught snooping, it wouldn't end well. Thinking fast, she grabbed a nearby stack of papers as if she were tidying up and turned toward the door just as the host entered. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see her there. For a split second she froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he'd hear it. I'm sorry, she stammered, forcing herself to sound calm. "I thought this was the restroom. I'll leave right away." She offered a small, apologetic smile, hoping it would mask her nerves. To her relief, he waved her off dismissively, muttering something about how the staff should know the layout better. As she slipped past him and hurried out of the room, she let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Back in the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to steady herself. That brief glimpse into the laptop had shaken her. She now had more questions than answers, and the weight of what she'd seen pressed heavily on her chest. Was this why those earlier conversations had felt so secretive? Had she stumbled onto something dangerous without even meaning to? For the rest of the night, She couldn't shake the feeling that someone might suspect her. Every time a guest glanced her way, or a member of the staff asked if she was okay, she wondered if they could tell something was off. But she kept moving, kept smiling, and kept doing her job. Inside, though, her mind was spinning. She knew she couldn't forget what she'd seen, but she also knew she couldn't act on it. Not yet. Not here. As the party began winding down and guests started leaving, she found herself replaying the events of the night over and over in her head. What was she supposed to do with what she'd learned? Could she walk away and pretend none of it mattered? Or did she have a responsibility to dig deeper, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. This night had changed her, and whatever happened next, she couldn't turn back now. The drive home that night was quiet, but her mind was anything but. Sitting in the passenger seat of the carpool van with other members of the waitstaff, she stared out the window, replaying everything she'd seen and heard. The email thread on the laptop, the hushed conversations, the guilty looks. It all swirled together like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together yet. But one thing was clear. Something big was happening, and it wasn't right. When she finally got back to her small apartment, she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but unable to relax. Her brain refused to shut off. She thought about the people at the party, the ones laughing over glasses of champagne, completely unaware that someone had caught a glimpse behind their shiny facade. Or maybe they weren't unaware. Maybe they counted on no one paying attention. That thought made her angry. Who were these people to think they could get away with whatever they wanted? She spent hours staring at the ceiling, tossing and turning as guilt gnawed at her. Staying silent felt wrong, like letting them win. But speaking up, that scared her more than she cared to admit. What if she made things worse? What if they found out it was her who'd been poking around? She didn't have money or connections to protect herself. She barely had enough savings to cover next month's rent. Still, the idea of doing nothing left a bitter taste in her mouth. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She couldn't let this go. Not entirely sure where to start, she reached out to someone she trusted, an old teacher from college who had always encouraged her curiosity and passion for truth. He was a journalist now, working for a local newspaper known for exposing corruption. When she called him, her voice trembled as she explained what she'd stumbled upon. At first, he listened quietly, asking only a few questions. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You realize how dangerous this could be, right?" She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know," she replied softly, "but I can't just ignore it." Her teacher agreed to meet her later that day. Over coffee, they talked strategy. He warned her not to act rashly. People involved in shady deals didn't take kindly to prying eyes. Together, they came up with a plan. She would gather as much information as she could without drawing attention to herself. Public records, social media posts, anything that might connect the dots. Meanwhile, he promised to guide her through the process, helping her understand how to piece everything together safely. Over the next few days, she threw herself into the task. During shifts at work, she casually asked co-workers about the host and his events, pretending to be curious about the glamorous world she briefly stepped into. Some shared stories about strange requests or secretive behavior, while others shrugged it off as just how rich people are. Outside of work, she scoured online databases, learning how to track property transfers and corporate filings. It wasn't easy. There were dead ends and confusing documents, but slowly, things began falling into place. Each new detail gave her a mix of hope and dread. Hope because she was uncovering the truth. Dread because she knew the risks were growing. Late at night, lying in bed, she imagined worst-case scenarios. Getting fired, being followed, or worse. Yet, every time fear crept in, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Somewhere out there, real people were being hurt by the actions of those who thought they were untouchable. And if she didn't try to stop it, Who would? As the pieces started forming a clearer picture, she realized she was crossing a point of no return. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was bigger than that. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a purpose, even if it terrified her. Whatever happened next, she knew she was ready to face it head on. As the days turned into weeks, her investigation grew deeper, and so did the risks. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was playing detective, piecing together clues that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the city. It was thrilling, but it was also terrifying. Every step forward felt like walking on thin ice, unsure if it would crack beneath her. She started noticing little things that made her uneasy. A co-worker who had always been friendly suddenly seemed distant, almost wary of talking to her. Another staff member mentioned how the boss had been asking odd questions about who was working which shifts. At first, she brushed it off as paranoia, but then she began to see patterns. Conversations stopped when she walked into a room. Eyes followed her movements more than they used to. Even the host himself glanced at her a little too long during one event, his expression unreadable. One evening, after leaving work late, she noticed a black car parked across the street from her apartment building. It wasn't unusual for cars to be there. It was a busy neighborhood, but something about this one felt off. The windows were tinted, and the engine idled silently, as if waiting. Her heart raced as she approached her building, keys clutched tightly in her hand. Once inside, she peeked through the blinds, watching the car for any movement. After what felt like forever, it finally drove away, but the unease stayed with her. The next day, she doubled down on being cautious. She changed her routine, taking different routes to work and avoiding places where she might be easily spotted alone. She even created a fake email account to send updates to her journalist contact, making sure no one could trace their communication back to her. Paranoia became her constant companion, but she reminded herself why she was doing this. If these people thought they could intimidate her into silence, they didn't know her well enough. Her efforts weren't wasted. Slowly but surely, the puzzle came together. Through public records, she discovered connections between the wealthy party host and several companies involved in questionable land deals. Social media posts revealed photos of him meeting with politicians and developers, all smiling like old friends. One document showed how entire communities had been displaced under the guise of urban development, their homes bulldozed to make way for luxury condos. The pieces fit perfectly, painting a picture of greed and corruption that went far beyond what she'd initially suspected. But the closer she got to the truth, the more exposed she felt. Late one night, as she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and notes, she heard a knock at her door. Her blood ran cold. No one visited her unannounced this late. She tiptoed to the peephole and looked out, but no one was there. Just an empty hallway. Was someone trying to scare her? Or was it just coincidence? Either way, it sent a chill down her spine. Despite the fear, she refused to back down. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the families who had lost their homes, the workers exploited by shady contracts, and the countless others hurt by the system these people controlled. She thought about her own struggles, the sacrifices her family had made just to keep food on the table. Those memories fueled her determination. These people thought they were untouchable, but she was going to prove them wrong. By the time she handed over her findings to her journalist contact, she knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. He promised to protect her identity as much as possible, but he couldn't guarantee her safety. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice heavy with concern. She nodded without hesitation. "I have to," she said simply. "If I don't, who will?" And with that, she took the biggest leap of her life, knowing full well that once the story broke, nothing would ever be the same again, for her or for the people she was exposing. The day the story broke, it felt like a bomb had gone off. The newspaper hit stands early in the morning, and by noon, everyone was talking about it. The front page headline screamed accusations that no one could ignore. Wealthy elite exposed. In massive land grab scandal. Beneath the bold letters was a photo of the mansion where the party had taken place, its glittering facade now looking sinister under the harsh light of truth. As the article spread online, phones buzzed with notifications, TV news anchors scrambled to cover the breaking story, and social media erupted with outrage. People who had never cared about corporate corruption were suddenly demanding answers. Politicians distanced themselves from the individuals named in the report, while others denied any involvement, though their shaky voices gave them away. It was chaos, but for the young woman at the center of it all, it was validation. Her hard work hadn't been in vain. At first, she stayed hidden, letting the journalist take the lead. He'd promised to keep her identity confidential, referring to her only as a source close to the investigation. But staying silent wasn't easy. She watched interviews on TV, read comments online, and listened to debates about accountability, all without revealing her role. Part of her wanted to step forward, to show the world that an ordinary person could stand up to power. But another part of her knew the risks. If people found out it was her, retaliation would come swiftly. Then came the threats. Not directly to her, not yet, but they rippled through the air like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Friends of the wealthy host began pointing fingers, accusing the journalist of fabricating lies. Some even hinted that someone on the inside must have leaked information. Co-workers whispered nervously when she passed by, their eyes darting away too quickly. One night, graffiti appeared on the wall outside her apartment building. Snitches get stitches. Her stomach churned as she stared at the red paint, knowing exactly what it meant. Despite the fear, something unexpected happened. Support started pouring in. Former colleagues reached out, thanking her for shining a light on injustices they'd suspected but never dared to confront. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, calling her brave and saying she gave them hope. Activists rallied around the cause, organizing protests and demanding justice for the families displaced by the land grabs. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. There were others willing to fight alongside her, even if they didn't know her name. When the pressure became too much, she decided to go public. Sitting down for an interview with the journalist, she revealed herself not as a victim or a pawn, but as someone who had chosen to act. Cameras rolled as she spoke calmly but firmly, explaining how she'd uncovered the evidence and why she couldn't stay silent. "I'm not special," she said, looking straight into the lens. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. That's all." Her words resonated far beyond the city limits. Overnight, she became a symbol of courage, a reminder that ordinary people could challenge extraordinary power. Of course, not everyone cheered her on. Critics called her reckless, accusing her of ruining lives for attention. Others dismissed her as naive, claiming she didn't understand the complexities of business. But none of that mattered to her. What mattered was that the conversation had shifted. People were finally paying attention. In the weeks that followed, investigations picked up steam. Authorities raided offices, seized documents, and questioned those involved. Some resigned in disgrace, while others fought back with lawsuits and PR campaigns. The wealthy elite tried desperately to control the narrative, but the cracks in their empire were already showing. And through it all, the young woman stood firm, refusing to let fear silence her again. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. She'd sparked a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Whether she liked it or not, she was part of something bigger now, and no matter what happened next, she'd proven that even the smallest voice could make waves, if it was brave enough to speak. The dust didn't settle quickly. In fact, it felt like the storm she had unleashed only grew stronger with each passing day. The fallout from the exposé was everywhere, on the news, in conversations at coffee shops, and even in whispers on the streets. People were divided. Some hailed her as a hero, someone who dared to take on the untouchable. Others criticized her motives, accusing her of seeking fame or causing unnecessary trouble. But through all the noise, one thing became clear. The world couldn't ignore what she had uncovered. For her, life changed in ways she never expected. She lost her job shortly after the story broke. The host claimed budget cuts, but everyone knew better. Her co-workers stopped talking to her, either out of fear of being associated with her, or because they believed the lies spread by those trying to discredit her. Walking into the same spaces where she used to serve canapés now felt alien. Strangers recognized her face, some nodding approvingly, others glaring as if she'd betrayed them personally. It wasn't easy, but she reminded herself why she'd done it. The sacrifices were worth it if it meant justice for the people who had been pushed aside. What surprised her most was the support that came from unexpected places. Former colleagues who once avoided her reached out, admitting they admired her courage. Neighbors who barely knew her left encouraging notes on her doorstep. Even strangers sent messages sharing their own stories of fighting against injustice. One woman wrote to say her family had been forced out of their home years ago because of similar schemes. "You gave me hope," the letter read. "Thank you for standing up when no one else would." Encouraged by this wave of solidarity, she decided to step further into the role fate had thrust upon her. With guidance from the journalist who had helped her expose the truth, she began writing articles of her own. At first, they were small pieces, about local issues, community struggles, and everyday people making a difference. But soon, her voice grew louder. Editors started noticing her work, and before long, she found herself being invited to speak at events, sitting on panels, and even testifying before government committees about the need for transparency and accountability. Her journey wasn't without challenges. There were days when the threats felt overwhelming, when the weight of everything she'd risked pressed down on her chest. Late nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd made the right choice, became routine. Yet, every time, doubt crept in. She remembered the faces of the families who had lost their homes, the workers exploited by greedy corporations, and the countless others whose voices had been silenced. They deserved better, and she owed it to them to keep going. Years later, looking back, she realized how far she'd come. That quiet waitress who had once felt invisible in a room full of power players was now a respected advocate for change. She still lived modestly, choosing purpose over profit, but she didn't mind. Money had never been what drove her. It was the belief that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, creating waves of impact. One evening, while speaking at a community event, she shared a story that summed up her journey. "When I walked into that mansion that night, I didn't think I was stepping into anything extraordinary," she said, her voice steady and warm. "I thought I was just doing my job, but sometimes life gives us moments where we have to choose to stay silent or to speak up, to turn away or to stand firm. And when those moments come, we don't get to decide how big they are. We just have to decide what kind of person we want to be." As the crowd erupted into applause, she smiled softly, knowing she'd made the right decision. The scars of that battle remained, a lingering sense of caution, a few enemies she'd rather forget, but so did the victories. Systems had been reformed, policies rewritten, and lives changed. Most importantly, she had shown the world that courage doesn't belong only to the powerful. Sometimes it's found in the unlikeliest of places, in the heart of a young woman who refused to look away, even when everyone else did.